Hi guys, it's Steph from IDRIVEACLASSIC, and if you remember last week's video when we looked at the Hillman Imp, I mentioned that we had another surprise car that we borrowed from Drive Dad's car, and it's this fantastic Chrysler Avenger. I thought we'd continue that Roots Group story, and it was a bit of a funny one because I turned up to review the Imp and then I got offered the Chrysler and I thought, why not? So I've not really done too much prep for this one, but I thought you don't never turn down an opportunity to drive something interesting. So in today's video, we have borrowed this car from Drive Dad's car, which is part of Great British Car Journey, and we're going to take it out for a spin. Tell you a little bit about the Avenger, tell you why this one is not called a Hillman or a Talbot, and we'll discover something new. So let's kick off and have a look around the outside. The Avenger was a car made by Roots from 1970 until 1978. And in fact, it was the first and the last car to be designed by Roots when they'd been owned by Chrysler. And just like the Imp, it was produced under many badged variants, including the Chrysler Avenger from 1976, the Talbot Avenger, and many other names like the Plymouth Cricket in the US and Canada. Although it must be mentioned that the car was made in Argentina until 1990 and sold between 79 and 81 as the Talbot Avenger by the PSA Peugeot Citroen group. I feel like a lot of this Roots stuff gets very confusing. Now, the car was designed by a team overseen by Roots styling group director Roy Axe, which is probably a name you've heard before if you're into British cars, because he's had a hand in all sorts of cars, including the Sunbeam Rapier, the Rover 800, and the Rover 200-400 series, amongst many other cars. The initial idea behind the car was that it would be an upgrade for the Minx, the bestseller in the Roots lineup at the time. However, in the background, they were also working on the Hillman Hunter, which was taking the majority of the resources and ended up replacing the Minx and the Super Minx. However, despite all of this, they continued the work on the Avenger for a few different reasons. So first of all, the car was bigger than the Imp and therefore naturally fell into a bit of a gap that they had, which was that mid-range, kind of budget market for Roots. And it also meant that it came up against cars like the Cortina and the Marina. And a little bit like that Imp that we tested last week, there was a criteria for the designers, which included the fact that the car needed to be spacious, smart, and speedy. And it meant that the growing demands of buyers who'd moved on from the early 60s were being met, because if you know anything much about early motoring, at the time of the early 60s, things like heaters, sun visors, they were all optional extras. But by the 70s, things had completely changed. Because of course now it was also the era of car buyers having choice. It meant that they were demanding more for their money and expectations and standards were being raised by things like the increasing dominance of Ford, a wider choice of purchasing options, and of course the quiet growing threat of the Japanese automotive opposition. Roots also started to consider a new market, which was the company car. And with the new tech of computers being able to design body shells, which they implemented into this, Roots had a great car design, which was not only designed with kind of the buyer in mind, but also put ego out of the window. Because you tend to find a lot of cars, people get very egotistical, they think we know best. Roots actually did a lot of talking to the general public and thinking about what they wanted. Now, with that, Roots also considered another market, which was the female buyer, because the female buyer was growing in dominance. And so what they did was they drafted in female buyers and consultants and fashion consultants to really think about what women wanted from a car, albeit it was a lot more of an aesthetics thing. So they thought about things like fashion, styling, colour. And it wasn't just that design that was forward thinking. Chrysler also handed out a lot of investment and created new engines, and for the South American market, an 1800cc variant. South African cars had a Peugeot engine fitted if you're that way over that side of the world. Now, looking at some of the cars launched in the late 60s and early 70s, things like the Austin Maxi, it seems like a little bit of a surprise that after so much investment, they didn't push a little bit deeper on those gearboxes and go for a 5-speed box, but instead they played it really safe and they went for a 4-speed manual box twinned with either a 1250 or 1500cc engine at launch. In 1976, the car became a Chrysler, just like this one. And it kind of all is really tied into turbulence that was going on at the time. They had to draft in a government-backed rescue plan, changes to factories, and with that, they decided to do a bit of a facelift. So not only did the car get a new front end and dash, as we see in the car today, and the rear lights, which changed from that earlier J shape, it also became the Chrysler Avenger. Now, previously the trim had been Super and Deluxe, and they were replaced with LS, GL and GLS, I believe, sitting at top spec. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I've got that little bit right. Now, the Avenger really came to a natural end as it became a bit more of a niche, because really the only public that really loved buying into this car was the British public. And we were now in an era of kind of global dominance. You know, Ford had become Ford of Europe, it wasn't just Ford of England anymore, and cars were now meant to be cars which appealed to Europe or the rest of the world. It wasn't all just about one country anymore. And with the phasing out of the Avenger from the 77, 78, the car just kind of disappeared. And then it was replaced by the Solara, which in my opinion isn't quite as cool as the Avenger, however basic it is. Now, overall, nearly 750,000 Avengers were sold before everything slowly came to an end. But thankfully, places like Drive Dad's Car and the Owners Club for these cars are keeping these vehicles alive for future people to discover. Actually, they're a lot better than many cars of the era. Now, before we go for a drive for ourselves today, I thought we'd ask somebody else who booked a test drive what he thought of the experience.
My name's Daniel and I'm here at Drive Dad's Car at the Great British Car Journey. Today I chose to show this Chrysler Avenger, which was really good fun. It's just like a postcard to the past, really. Thin little steering wheel, gear change that I couldn't get the hang of first time around, comfy seats, and a kind of quite cramped feel, but just like a journey into the past of cars that I used to see these cars every now and again. I think a neighbour had one when I was growing up. It's just enjoyable just to have a pootle around a car park in a car of yesteryear, and I don't think you get to do that anywhere else in this country, so I think it was good, well worth the money just to have a fun little drive in cars of the past. And my dad, he's been lucky today because he got to drive his Hillman Imp, which he used to drive as a probably a 20-something in the 1970s, so I really enjoyed sitting in the back of that. It was good fun as well.
Now, this is a funny one for me because I do like to prep a little bit before you come out on test. So to be thrown into something and see it firsthand, a car that I've never really seen in the flesh, is actually quite exciting. Now, one of the first things that hit me when I opened the door on this car was it is very simple inside. Now, I know that we talked about on that walk around about how it was marketed towards, you know, the company car buyer. And you do get a touch of that because it feels very simple inside. And bear in mind, this isn't bottom spec because you've got GL, so you've got the bottom one, and then you've got GL, and then you've got GLX. So this isn't even bottom rung. So it feels quite basic. But it must have been quite well made because if you think about it, it's been quite well used. It's on 78,000 miles. At least, who knows if it's been round the clock, and all the seats still look very good, the dash still looks well. So whilst it's very simple, it has been well constructed. Now, the other thing that really struck me is it feels like a real 70s hitting the 80s. Now, of course, I know that they started changing bits when they changed it over from Hillman through to Chrysler, but it feels like a really strange mix because if it was a 70s car, you wouldn't just have vinyl on the door cards, it would be vinyl seats. But as we start to move into those 80s, we see the velour seats, we see the introduction of lots more of this black moulded plastic, and it feels a lot more modern than the Hillman badge variety that's come before it, which I guess at the time must have been quite exciting. It must have felt like a step forward. Now, there's some bits that I really like about this, and there's some bits that I don't. So I quite like the colour scheme, actually. I think it's quite understated. I don't think it feels as dated as the age of the car. But the storage situation in here is a little bit grinding for me. So I really like a glove box, as many of you will know. And we've lost the glove box in here, but we do have these whacking great door pockets. Now, it's all very well and good, but if you think about what you put in the glove box, it's little odds and ends, bits and pieces. When all that's a little bit more visible in door pockets like this, it can start to make a car feel very cluttered and untidy. And for me, I don't know about you at home, but I like to shove everything in the glove box and crack on. Now, enough of my waffle, let's talk about what else we've got inside the car. So when we look directly into the centre console here, it's again that very simple design. You've got a cigar lighter, heater, radio coming down into this area, which for me is a poor use of space. You've got lots of storage, but we've already got a parcel shelf. We've got these two door pockets. Do we need all this as well? Is there not something we could have done with this space? Coming in front of us, the dials are lovely and simply laid out, and actually I quite like a uniform layout like this, so this quite appeals to me, and I think might appeal to some of you at home as well. You've got your oil gauge, temperature gauge, rev counter, and would you believe it, the rev counter goes up to 8,000 RPM. We're not going to be doing that sort of mad stuff today. And on the right hand side, you've got your Speedo, your petrol gauge and your amp meter there as well. You've got 3 stalks, you've got your indicators. You've got your lights and horn. And then on your right hand side, you've got your wipers. Now I'm going to try and show you those because I mean it's a bit drizzly today. They're actually quite speedy. I was quite impressed with them. In fact, let's just knock into it now. I'll show you. Hold on. So that's single speed and that's second speed. Now I'd actually say they're faster than the Protons. They're quite impressive actually. So actually, whilst it's quite basic, it's a very usable sort of classic. You could probably just use this today as a little runabout. Now let's get it started up. You did have a few engine variants as we talked about when we were walking around, but on this we've got the 1.6. So I'm going to get us started up. There doesn't really appear to be much sound deadening, and it's actually remarkably quiet. Let me give it a little rev. And I'll let you hear that from the outside as well, and then I'm going to buckle up and take you for a drive. I am now going to take you out for a drive in this car, and I've already given it a spin around the block, and I'm really surprised by how nice it is. So let's go up through the box. Now I'm going to let you into a little secret. Sometimes I take cars out and I just think, I cannot wait to give you back. And this one has really surprised me because sometimes I go and test cars and I think, am I even really that fussed about that car? And when I got offered this today, I thought, I'm going to take it out because it's one of those cars that I've always thought, I wonder what it's like, but I've never felt a real pull to it. And it's really, really surprised me about how much I like it, except that my indicators and wipers are on opposite sides on the Triumph, so I keep getting it wrong. But honestly, this is a little dream to drive. Changing gear, look at this, watch this. When on earth did you last get in a car where you could change gear with 2 fingers? That's nuts. It's so well put together. The suspension feels a little bit rough, but like the steering, look how responsive that is. You know when people describe cars as the perfect mile muncher, this might actually be one of them. It's so nice to drive. It's the light handling, it's responsive, watch this, just even a little turn around the corner. That is lovely. Quite often you get in stuff from the 70s and it's like all over the shop like this, and you're turning it and you have to put a real bit of gusto behind you. Gear change is iffy because it's not quite warm, and it could, you know, there's some cars, my Marina, and it could be a bit iffy going into second. And this car, it's not even that warm. Straight through the box, honestly, it's like cutting through a butter with a hot knife. I thought the Proton's gearbox was good. This is just, I can't believe how nice this is. So I'm going to take you around here. I keep getting this route wrong, by the way. Thank goodness Jason isn't watching me. Right, hold on. Where am I in this gearbox? There we go. It's quite quiet as well. It's a funny little one because she's very unassuming when you see her parked up and you think, oh, it's a 70s saloon, it's what it is. And then you get into it and it feels so together, so modern, and just a genuinely pleasing drive. And something that I don't always talk about that I'm going to talk about on this one is that not only is it a pleasing drive in terms of it's got lovely handling and braking is sharp, and it's the seating as well. It's so comfortable. It's like, you know, when you sit on your sofa at home, it's like that. Now they've left these cones out, so I'm going to take you through and show you how easy it is to navigate through these. People will see me cross my hands over and tell me off. But look at that. That is just, and the turning circle as well. Look at that. You can come right back round. Do it again. This has really taken me by surprise. I thought it was just going to be a bit average, to be honest. Actually, it's quite good. And also, it's been really nice to get into a car because I've done a few things lately. You know, like that SD1 that I did, and I got in and I felt like, oh God, I feel like everything's not quite where I need it to be. And with this, I've got into it, and aside from the wipers and the wipers and the indicators being on the opposite sides to what I'm used to, it's been one of those cars that I could just slip in and just start driving without any drama. And for me, that's what makes a good car. Something you can slip into, something that feels, you feel automatically at ease in. So for me, out of this and the Imp, I thought the Imp was going to be my clear winner as to which was my favourite car I'd borrowed. But now that I've driven this, I kind of prefer the driving experience in this. I think this is a little bit more, you know, a little bit more usable. I've enjoyed both enormously, and the great thing is, if you've watched this video and thought Steph's had a really good time and I'm quite jealous and I'd like to drive one too, you can go and get yourself to drive Dad's car and go do the same thing. You know, packages start from, I think it's £49, and that gets you into the museum as well. So I mean, you know, you get to do something that you can't do anywhere else in the country. As you can see, the track's quite good. You get to go around it 3 or 4 times. You get an instructor with you. So there's no stress, no drama. You just get to enjoy a car. And, you know, you're not having to worry about, like, other vile drivers on the road, which is quite nice, because sometimes when you get in a car that you've never driven before or that you haven't driven in a long time, and, you know, you've got angry person in an SUV up behind you, it can really take the joy out of it. So to do it on this little track here privately and just chill out and enjoy myself, it's actually been quite a dream. Now unfortunately, the only thing I would say is we've not been able to get up to, you know, a great speed, which is what I would have liked to have done. But I imagine that if you were kind of topping out on the motorway, you might need that 5th gear. So that's the only real complaint about the experience for me, is that I haven't been able to take it out on the motorway. But at the same time, the great thing about Drive Dad's Car is that there's a massive range of cars that you can try. It's a relatively easy thing to save up for or buy as a gift experience. And it's a nice way as well to keep people aware of classic cars, appreciating them. So for me, it gets a big thumbs up. I've had a really good afternoon out. Unfortunately, the weather didn't play ball, so it's been a bit rainy and miserable. But all in all, it's been a pleasing day. So if you want any more details on Drive Dad's car or the museum, if you check the description box below, all the links and all the info are just down there. Now it's time for me to park it up, hand the keys back to the team and say to you, take care and drive safely.